Most entrepreneurs think the right structure protects them, but institutions don't look at structures, they look at behavior. There are many businesses formed as an LLC with a bank account and contracts. They still lose protection. And the reason it failed wasn't a missing document. It was something nobody ever thought to check. But institutions don't ask what you set up. They ask why something failed. This episode is not about what to set up, or what to file, or what to copy. It's about outcomes. Institutions don't assess what you meant to do or what you plan to do next. They look backward at what actually happened and whether your structure behaved predictably under pressure. Intent lives in the future. Evaluation lives in the record. That's why explanations don't carry much weight once consequences show up. What matters is whether past decisions produce clear authority, continuity, and accountability when it counted. That process is the same whether the institution performing the analysis is a bank in London, a regulator in Toronto, or a counterparty in Singapore. And when they look, protection either existed or it didn't. From the outside, institutions don't see founders, they see files, accounts, signatures, and behavior. They never ask who you are, they ask what you did. And the business you're going to hear about checked every visible box and still failed when it mattered. The business looked correct from the outside. It had an entity, a bank account, contracts, and it had revenue. From the owner's perspective, structure was done. But from the institution's perspective, structure failed. Not partially, not temporarily, but completely. Protection didn't hold. The important part is not that it failed. The important part is where it failed. Because nothing dramatic happened at formation. Nothing obviously happened in operations. The failure occurred earlier, quietly, in a place most entrepreneurs never examine. The failure didn't happen when the lawsuit hit. It happened long before that, in a place no one ever audits. Because institutions never begin with paperwork. They begin with consequence. Something triggered review, a dispute, a freeze, an interruption, a transition, a stress event. From there, the review moves backward. Who made the decision that led here? Who controlled the resources involved? Who had authority at the moment pressure appeared? This is not adversarial, it's mechanical. Institutions operate this way across borders because behavior is easier to measure than compliance. Institutions are not trying to be punitive. They're trying to identify responsibility. And responsibility follows control. Always. That principle holds whether you're dealing with a local bank, a foreign investor, or a multinational clearing corporation system. They weren't trying to decide who owned it. They were trying to decide who was responsible. And responsibility always follows control. In this case, the failure point wasn't obvious. It wasn't the contract, the account, or the entity. It was authority. Authority lived with the individual, not the structure. Decisions were made personally. Exceptions were approved personally. Risk was absorbed personally. The structure existed, but it never replaced the person. The simplest test is absence. When the person wasn't available, nothing else could act. So when pressure arrived, the institution didn't have to break through anything. There was nothing to break through. Responsibility was already personal. This is where most entrepreneurs get confused. They think structure fails because something pierced it. And in reality, structure fails because it never carried authority in the first place. In reality, structure doesn't fail when it's attacked. It fails when it's never carried to authority to begin with. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most bad structure feels good. It feels efficient. It feels flexible. It feels fast. Because the individual can act without friction. And as long as nothing challenges that authority, everything appears fine. Institutions don't intervene during comfort. They intervene during contradiction. And that's why cross-border businesses discover structural weaknesses faster than domestic ones. That's why founders say everything was working until it wasn't. But it wasn't working. It just wasn't questioned yet. The structure didn't break when the pressure showed up. It was already broken. Nobody had looked closely enough to notice. Now, compare that with what happens when authority is real. Similar business, similar revenue, a similar risk profile. But authority lived inside the structure. Decisions followed documented roles. Control was delegated, not assumed. Execution matched governance. When pressure arrived, institutions did the same backward review. This time, responsibility stopped at the structure. Not because the structure was clever, because it was consistent. And that's the difference. Not sophistication, not complexity. Consistency. Entrepreneurs often believe success proves structure. Institutions believe consistency proves structure. Revenue doesn't validate separation. Longevity doesn't validate protection. And growth doesn't validate authority. Only behavior does. And behavior is evaluated under stress. That's why copying outcomes never works. You can copy documents and still fail. That's why global firms invest in governance before they invest in expansion. You can copy and still collapse. Why? Because you can't imitate what you don't recognize. And this is where most videos hand you a list instead of teaching you how to see. This is where most content will tell you what to do next. That would be a mistake. Because this episode was not about solutions. It was about causality. You've now seen how institutions evaluate structure. Not forward, not hypothetically, but backward, from outcome to authority. If protection failed, it failed for a reason. If it held for a reason. Those reasons are not universal. They're specific, which means the next step is not execution. It's identification. Understanding whether your structure would survive review requires examination, not advice. Not with answers, but with the correct question. Thank you for joining the Prosapreneur Network.